Okay, I want to welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar. This is HR Basics, the fundamentals of human resources. We're going to have fun today with HR. So thank you all for joining us today. My name is Charlie Taylor. I'm at KDLA, one of the CE consultants. So I'll be monitoring the chat for any technical difficulties, questions that might get missed. So please go ahead and chat those types of things in as we go along. Our presenter for today is Sherry Slavey. She's the Human Resources Manager at the Boone County Public Library. And Sherry would like lots of interaction from you today. So please feel free to chat in your questions, comments, things like that as we go along. And we will allow plenty of time for questions from Sherry. If you have, as I mentioned, technical difficulties, please go ahead and chat those in as we go along. At the end of the webinar, you'll be able to download these slides as a PDF to save and look at later. Additionally, I'll be sending out another email to you with your certificate of attendance and a link to a survey about this training. And we are recording this session. It will be posted on our archive webinars page within about a week. So we'll probably have a lot of good content today. So you can go back and check out the recording and see anything that you've missed. So I think that's everything. Sherry, I'm going to go ahead and mute my phone and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, and I want to welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm just here to help in any way possible for you. I've tried to start off with some of the basics, and then I'm happy to build on anything or any topic you guys may have toward the end that we can kind of help out with. So feel free, like she said, to chat in, and I'll do my best to answer your questions, okay? So I guess I'm going to go ahead and get started with my first slide. I think in getting, like I say, to the fundamentals of human resources, some of the things I've discovered in my career here at the library and being here 10 years, you know, you always have to start off with a good foundation and having an employee manual. What I've given you in this screen or the next two screens is just an outline of what should be contained in a manual. Doesn't always have to be there, but a lot of highlights of what should be somewhere within your employee manuals. Now, many of you may have counties that you're part of and you follow the county manuals. Perfectly fine, but anything else, this just may be some topics that you may want to address in your employee manuals that really help set the foundation for an organization. You know, everybody has to create a manual that is specific to their organization as long as you contain the core essential of the laws and things of that nature. But I feel that it's just, you know, imperative to make your manual what it is exclusive to your organization, because we all do things a little differently, and obviously based on size and whatnot within the Kentucky library systems. So does anyone have any questions or comments on the topics that I've listed in the employee manual on either the first or the second screen we have available, either as to why there's an importance of it or why there's not? I could spend the whole hour just on an employee manual if that were the case, but I just want to try to help anyone any way I can and just at least set some ground level rules so that you guys can get what you need out of this presentation. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions, but feel free to ask if you have anything regarding the employee manual. Next thing I jump into, beyond the employee manual, are interview guidelines. Before we get into interview guidelines, beyond the employee manual, one of the best things I think you guys can develop is job descriptions. In this day and age, there's a lot of different job descriptions out there. You can beg and borrow, cut and paste to what's exclusive for your organization. Ultimately, you may want to have your attorney on file or with your organization review them ultimately before you publish things, but not always. Once you establish a good core, I think that's essential in setting up jobs, expectations, everything of that nature, so that your employees have a clear expectation as well as you have the right expectations what to get out of your employees. So aside from that, with the job descriptions, I really couldn't get anything in here specifically. Some of the things I like as far as job description, there's a website called hrtools.com, and they offer a video called Descriptions Now. That is a template that you can walk through to help set up jobs, but from what I've seen in Kentucky, you can kind of take bits and pieces as to what fits your organization off of different ones that you see either on KDLA or other library websites. I feel that's very helpful. I'll give one little plug to our Society of Human Resource Management. Although some of you may not be human resource professionals, you may always want to consider joining the Society of Human Resource Management, only so that you have access to the resources, such as forms and things of that nature, because there's a lot of helpful information on their website that you as even non-professionals may want to use. So that's definitely a suggestion. The next thing, jumping from job descriptions, like I said, you've started with your manual, you've gone through job descriptions. The next thing I'd like to approach is interview guidelines. In the next couple of slides, I give you categories. Obviously, you see avoid asking about, and you can ask about in different things, you know, what you can ask and what you should avoid asking. Most of you should be familiar enough that you pretty much don't want to ask anything about date of birth, age, race, religion, anything of that nature. It's very hard if you don't run a structured interview with set questions to venture off that topic. And I'm sure many of you, many of you get into conversations, and being cautious about those conversations so that those don't run you into situations of questions you should not ask. One of my first couple of interviews at the library I was sitting in on, and another manager was conducting it, and she was interested. She knew the person, where they went to school, or knew of them and where they went to school. And before you knew it, in the conversation, she said, "What year did you graduate?" That obviously can fall into the age category, so that is not a question, or even in conversation, you would want to get into. Let's see here. I see back, I'm sorry, jump back here where Alicia asked about, does your manual address employee performance plans, process, etc. With that, I do in our library here at the Boone County Public Library, and I would suggest that you have some form of a process documented in your manual for your employee performance plan, whichever type of plan that you utilize. So sorry I overlooked that question. Back to the interview guidelines, again, age, birthplace, things of that nature. If you have someone of a different diversity in your interview, wait till after you've hired them to ask where they're from or how they got their last name or something of that matter, because you don't want to get into a situation where you're being discriminatory. If for some reason you wouldn't hire that individual and you've had that conversation, it can very easily turn into a discriminatory issue. So just being cautious how your interviews get into, wander off into conversations, and limiting that. I don't like being impersonal, but it's also a very safe factor to try and stick to your set questions. So is there anything specific within the interview guidelines on these next couple of slides that anyone might have questions about? I hate to read through each and every category, but if there's anything I can answer in regard to some of these different areas, I'm happy to, and can definitely, anything you guys would like to know further about the different interview guidelines or the recommendations. As you can see, key one I told you about race. Avoid asking about race or color of skin. And you see, you can ask pretty much nothing. That's why that field is blank. So just being cautious what you ask when you get into interviews, and depending on how the conversation goes with your candidates. Okay, so if anyone has any questions on interview guidelines, otherwise I'll move right along. All right, not seeing anything pop up in chat. So moving on to the next area. And again, I feel these are kind of the foundations and the fundamentals of human resources. Developing all these things help you going forward. Now, what I'm showing you here is part of the Fair Labor Standard Act. This is right off the Department of Labor's website through the Wage and Hour Division. This is just talking about setting the basics. As you all know, the current minimum wage is still $7.25. That's the federal minimum wage. I know there are some different locals in the state of Kentucky that have gone beyond that $7.25. So you always have to adhere to whatever wage in your particular area gives the employee the best benefit. So if your state or your local, if a state or local trumps the federal, then you would have to pay that minimum wage. Some other things to talk about. This gets into later in the conversation, but overtime again. This is going to be something that's going to face a lot of different libraries, especially our smaller systems, how you're going to budget for that, how you're going to handle that. Some of us, between having exempt and non-exempt employees and whether we've paid overtime in the past, we may get into a little more expense because I feel that's going to be the best route for some of the smaller systems to obviously just pay overtime, because some of those exempt level employees that you may have had comp time for now fall in a non-exempt status. Hours worked. If I go through this screen here, hours worked ordinarily include all the time during the day which an employee is required to be on the employee's premise, on duty, or at a prescribed workplace. The definition of hours worked is very important. After this screen, I believe I have a screenshot of just a page of our BCPL employee manual. And I just wanted to show you our manual just to show you how we incorporate some of these things, which to me have proven very good to be able to fall back on and define. So I think it's very good that some of these things are within our manual. They've been very helpful. Record-keeping purposes. Depending on how some of you are involved in the Affordable Care Act and what you report, it's becoming very important with the record keeping that we all have. So that's becoming very, very prominent in our record keeping abilities. Child labor laws. We here at Boone County don't typically hire under 16, don't typically have to worry about that. I realize some of you in the smaller areas may hire some students who may be 14 or 15, and as you know, they're just restricted in laws as far as how late they can work during school hours, that type of thing. So that's something to watch out for with the child labor laws if you're employing anyone or if you're in an area where you're having a hard time recruiting your shelvers or your pages and you want to employ someone a little bit younger than 16 who can show up for work. So that's kind of why, and I just wanted to report out, show you an example of the DOL website. If you haven't ever gone to it, there are lots of helpful information, different fact sheets that are very helpful on the Department of Labor website. So again, if I jump to the next screen, this is again is a page out of our Boone County Employee Manual talking about work schedules. Just in regard to the Department of Labor's website, we talk about schedules, and we talk that let's see, our full-time employees or those in a 40-hour, we went to, and it also defines our standard work week, whether it's Sunday through Saturday, whether it's Wednesday through Tuesday, whether it's Monday through Sunday, whatever your organizations like to set up, it's helpful that your work week or your standard work week is defined in your manual so that when you go to reimbursing your employees for their hours worked, that it's clearly defined and that's something you're able to present to them. Again, we've also covered here our breaks and our lunches. How often you should allow a break, how often you should allow a lunch period, that type of thing. We get into overtime. Overtime, at least in our organization, must be an approved advance by our director. Obviously, if there's a special need, otherwise overtime pretty much does not exist here at Boone County Public Library. It's just not within the budget. One thing that we do have, of course, documented in our overtime policy is that paid time off, vacation, sick time, is not counted toward hours worked for the purposes of overtime pay considerations. So, for example, if somebody works 44 hours in a week, it just happened that way, they had a program, they had to stay late. If they took a day's vacation, and that was 8 hours of those 44 hours, that only leaves them working 36 hours. They would not by law, have to be paid 4 hours of overtime because of how you define whether you're going to pay them as work time for vacation or sick pay. So that happens a lot of times in a holiday situation. My manager get called on, have to work extra, things of that nature. But again, we watch our employees very carefully to keep them never scheduled above 40. So being very cautious of that factor in the overtime, making sure certain things are defined and that type of thing, I think is very helpful in establishing that with your employees. So does anyone have any questions so far on the work schedules, the Department of Labor, some basic rules in that area as far as overtime and things of that nature? Okay, just waiting on Diane here. I'll see what her question is and what I can help. Okay. Diana Kane has asked, if you work 6 hours, do you have to take a lunch by law? If you work more than 6 hours in a day, by law, yes, you do have to. So if you work 6:01, you better see that lunch break on their time card. That, of course, would cut them back to 5.5. If they work 6 hours or less, no, they do not. So you're safe there, but it must be more than 6 hours and anything over that. So, and Malta has also asked, would like to be able to copy your policy to use here. That's perfectly fine. I'm free to share anything that we have. If anyone at the end, when I'll give you my email address as well, feel free to email me. And anything I can do to help you or share with you, I'm happy to. That's perfectly fine. So feel free. I like to always be a resource for some of our smaller libraries and help where I can. Again, I know you guys don't have the resources to employ a human resource professional. Let me go back to the questions here. Alicia says, I see you need to take a lunch before 5 hours is worked. Is there a limited time before you can schedule a lunch? According to Kentucky state law, if you obviously have someone scheduled in an 8-hour day, you cannot ask the employee to take the lunch any sooner than 3 hours after they start their shift and no later than 5 hours after they start their shift. Now, if someone elects to run home at 2 o'clock on their lunch hour because they have to go meet a serviceman, that's perfectly fine. That's the employee's choice. Then would again make documentation of that the employee chose to leave. Don't think they'd ever come back to it. We used to have waivers that we would use and people would sign off saying they chose to take their lunch break in or around that 3 to 5 hour period. But again, by law, that's what you need to do unless the employee chooses otherwise. Malta, again, old director allowed staff to count lunch and paid time if didn't leave building for lunch. Non-exempt employees should always take a designated lunch break. If for some reason that employee becomes dissatisfied somewhere down the road, they may be a great employee, but for who knows what reason they become dissatisfied, they could go back and file a back pay claim against you and say that you never paid them for their lunches. You would owe back pay, penalty, and other things. So I would definitely change that up, if you have that situation. But any non-exempt hourly employee should take an unpaid lunch break. And let's see here, Deborah, any word on the change of wage level for definition of exempt employee? I'll cover that, Deborah, a little more toward the end, just to get into that. And then jumping to Allison, how about 11-hour days? We receive a half-an-hour lunch and 2 paid 15-minute breaks in an 8-hour day. Which additional breaks are necessary? Well, that's one work shift. So in a shift more than 6 hours, someone is entitled to a paid lunch break. If they're working 11, what I do here is obviously give them their 2 paid 15-minute breaks. That's what we allow, as well as the unpaid lunch break. Depending on if they have a longer day than that, the way our policy is worded here is if someone works more than 4 consecutive hours, they're entitled to a paid 15-minute break. If that's the case, depending on how their work schedule works out, and it's more than 12, well, maybe I throw in an extra paid 15-minute break. But in one solid shift, you do not need to allow more than 1 lunch break. Now, if the employer would like to take one, fine, I would not be opposed. But as required, it's 1 break per more than a 6-hour shift. Allison, how about, okay, we already did the about 11-hour days. Cynthia France, let's see, doesn't take their break, should anything be done? No, nothing has to be done if they don't take their break. I would strongly encourage it because, again, you would never want an employee to become disgruntled, say she never gave them to me, blah, 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 blah. No, you want the employees to know it's always there. I recommend you take it. I know there are some good employees out there that do and don't, but it's always that employee that for whatever reason, somewhere down the road, becomes unhappy, that could put you in potential legal issues saying you didn't pay the breaks or you didn't allow them to take the breaks. 5, 6 years down the road, it's hard to document that you didn't allow them to take the breaks, that it was their choice. So I would say, in those situations, I would have to say documentation would be the biggest thing for me, and making sure, how often you do that, because again, something can always come back to get you later on. Okay, just waiting on a couple more questions. Charlene, a little break refreshing you. It makes my day not seem so long. Yeah, by all means, I would encourage those breaks. I mean, if that's the way your plan is written, by all means, that four-hour mark or so, definitely make sure they have at least paid 15-minute break. It's definitely, I think it does refresh employees. Employees have had a long day dealing with customers. A few minutes away to walk away from that front desk sure doesn't hurt to refresh yourself and come back and provide better customer service. Tina, okay, so do you schedule their breaks or allow them to figure that based on coverage needs? If the employees can work it out amongst themselves, by all means, we let the employees, we set the expectation to obviously never leave the service area unattended. So if there is only 2 people on a desk, hopefully one will leave and alternate with the other one, and work amongst themselves what time is better for which one than the other, if somebody wants to go sooner or later. So try to let the employees work it out as much as possible. As long as you're aware that they are taking breaks and you know it's happening, that's definitely a good thing. But I don't get into scheduling the breaks unless I see that the employees have too many difficulties getting that accomplished on their own. Debbie, let's see. What if the employee won't take lunch but takes a 10-minute break even after being told? Well, then that's where you might jump into a performance improvement plan. I hate to say that, but they are really required, and again, it's in your best interest so you don't get caught up in the laws of not providing lunch breaks. Tina commented, we allow working it out on their own, and it works out most of the times. I agree. I think it pretty much works here in our system too, at Boone County as well. Oops, sorry, my screen has gone to sleep here. All right. Charlie, I've lost the screen here.
I'm bringing it back up right now.
Okay, thank you. I thought it was just me since my computer went to sleep.
No, it went dark. I'm not sure why. Hold on just a second. I'll get it up for you.
Okay. Yeah, so I think scheduling the breaks is all up to your organization and how well it works out. And I know some of you are larger, smaller, whatever's necessary. But in our, I'm not sure if it's on that page. A lot of times you'll see that, that things are scheduled within regard to the best library, maybe altered as necessary to provide the best library service. So I know we have it somewhere else in our manual about that breaks and lunches are scheduled within regard to customer service. Well, again, I'm sorry, that's C1. Breaks and lunches are scheduled with regard for service to the public and the efficient operation of each department. So again, it may go department by department. Yes, we're bigger, but again, even in whatever size operation you have, making sure that you're still providing great customer service. Okay. Yeah, there's no true definition whether that break has to be 10 or 15 minutes paid break. So you can use either or. I do see where Debbie mentioned the 10-minute break, but yes, 10 or 15 minutes. I don't believe the break is actually defined by a law other than to say a break is required. So what the employer decides on is completely an option by the employer. I'm just waiting for another question to pop up here. Okay. Diana, in an 8-hour workday, can staff decide whether to take a half or 4-hour lunch or dinner? Yes, we do allow our employees to do that. Again, some find that time to go run an errand on their lunch break, go home for a reason if they're close enough. Again, in some of our smaller branches, sometimes instead of working, if they want that hour lunch, or maybe it's because of customer service needs, instead of working a 1 to 9, we may have them work a 12 to 9 because, again, we have them come in at 12 o'clock to help cover the afternoon lunch breaks. They may take their hour dinner break from, say, 4 to 5, and then back on the desk from 5 to 9 when we have our evening crowd. because 5 o'clock is when some of our day folks leave at 5, so who's ever working works that 5 to 9. So I do have some folks who are scheduled a 9-hour, take an hour for lunch, and still basically get their 8-hour day in. So that's all up to you and how you want to schedule that, and as far as your customer service coverage goes and, being there for your public. So, all right, anything else I can answer for anyone at this point in regard to this area? Okay. I will go ahead and move on to the next screen, and again, if you come up with more questions, feel free to at the end here. Next, I'm jumping into coaching and performance improvement plans. We, of course, like most employers, have a standard performance improvement plan. I did not post it up here, but basically it starts off with a coaching session, either verbally or in writing. Beyond that, if a behavior or a performance doesn't improve, we go to a written performance improvement plan. At that point in time, when I put someone on a performance improvement plan, depending on the nature of the concern, whether it be a behavior, whether it be attendance, whether I give them 30, 60, 90 days to improve. A lot of times I look at them over a 90-day period. Something to that effect helps quite a bit. In what I've provided here in these slides are something I've taken from some of my trainings that I offer to my employees, but just trying to help you with your documentation, things of that nature, what you should document, what you should discipline, what you shouldn't discipline. And if any of you have heard other human resource professionals, one of our biggest things is always document, document, document. If you're not sure, document it. Now, the degree of what you document might be a different story as long as it's not too, objective, I guess. But as you'll see here, the documentation of the employee performance is very important to both management and to the employees. Effective documentation can help employees take corrective action, and again, can help you with potential lawsuits if an organization has a progressive discipline policy. I've gone over the first two steps, the coaching performance improvement plan. Next, we have a probation step. With my probation step, a lot of times if it's gotten to that, I really do want, let me take a step back. I really do want my employees to improve. We've invested the time to hire them. We've invested the time in training. So I really want them to work out. If not, then the plan helps them get them on a path if they can't figure the path out themselves, that this is not a good fit for them. But along that being said, once someone gets to probation, sometimes I do probation without pay, and sometimes I do probation with pay, or I'm sorry, not with or without pay, but with time off. Sometimes I may tell them to take a week off and think about what they've done. And I might ask them for their part in providing me with a letter of how they think they can improve. Because sometimes when I think you put the onus back on the employee, it helps them better think about their behavior, whether it be attendance, whether it be tardiness. One of my funny stories is I once had a lady who tended to be quite tardy. And the tardiness continued. We went through all steps of the performance improvement plan, got to probation. I asked her to take 2 weeks off without pay and tell me why or how she thought she could improve her tardiness. She said, I just don't know what I can do. I set 2 or 3 alarm clocks. Well, I can't necessarily help that because we have a business need and we really have to have someone here at the library to help with our customers. But by showing that and doing a performance improvement plan with an employee, it's always best because should anything ever get into a legal concern, you've showed that you've made the effort to give this employee time to take corrective action against what's been done. So you've allowed the employee, you've offered suggestions, you've tried to help the employee, whether you've sent them to additional trainings in different areas, if it's something you can retrain. Because I've always taken retraining as an option too, if someone just isn't doing a procedure right or something. But again, it has to get to a pretty progressive level. But again, I try to follow this same plan with all employees. That way no one can ever accuse me of being inconsistent. So again, it's something I do with all employees. You'll see the principles surrounding the discipline: correctiveness, fairness, consistent, progressive, and due process. Talk about the discipline steps. Pretty much what I've said: an oral or written reprimand, suspension, disciplinary demotion, or termination. Again, most of you have probably come across someone who just isn't up to par and isn't performing or doing what you really need them to do, whether it be attendance, whether it be a particular work activity, something of that nature. You can continue to do it. So just keeping up with your performance improvement plan, being consistent with each step of it as you administer it to all employees who may or may not have issues, just making sure that you're fair. I mean, whether you treat the same person with attendance issues, you got to treat the second person with attendance issues the exact same way, because if it were ever to go into a court situation, you can say, this is what I do with all my employees if they get to this step. And you can always show that you do the same documentation and the same process. So if I go on to, I believe I have another screen in the coaching performance. Do investigate each incident regardless of how it first appears. Never discipline based on hearsay. Try your best to be the one who observes the behavior or the lack of behavior, the lack of work ethic. I always try my best to make sure, I may not always be the one to observe it, but otherwise I have one of my managers observe it so that I'm not hearing it through the grapevine. That firsthand knowledge of knowing what's happened. You don't want to tell everyone on staff to watch out for whatever the issue you might be disciplining, because you don't want everyone to be ganging up on one employee. I feel like that's kind of, I try to keep it as confidential as possible and limit it to myself, the manager, maybe one other person in charge, if that's the end result I have to go to. If it's one of my smaller branches and I don't have a manager on duty and I have to rely on my person in charge to report the incident, then that's what I rely on. Again, depending on the situation, allow the employee to explain his or her understanding of the incident. Always listen. Obviously you may not always have HR to confer with, but if you have another manager, keeping it confidential between two managers sometimes is the best, because at least you have someone to talk it out with. Let's see here. The don't yell or scream or curse. I unfortunately have raised my voice a time or two only to get control of a conversation. I don't consider it yelling or screaming or cursing, but I do know I have raised my voice to get control of a conversation, especially if the employee is out of control. Base disciplinary actions on rumors. Again, I've said don't do that. Make sure you have firsthand witness or have spoken directly to the person who was the firsthand witness. Discuss the employee's performance or conduct issues, don't discuss the employee's performance or conduct issues with other employees or coworkers. I'm going to jump to some of the questions here. Christina, what are your thoughts on recording conversations such as these? Typically, in my organization of my size, I usually have the manager of the employee as well as myself and the employee involved in a discussion. One, I either serve as the witness to the manager if the manager is delivering it, or I serve as the one delivering and the manager is my witness. So no one can ever come back and said he said, she said. Again, if that's not the person, take your next in command to sit in on it. Always have a witness. If a witness is not an option, yes, record the conversation. I have been in situations where I have recorded a conversation or two if I have not had a witness, but that's not always, I haven't always recorded every conversation. It just depends on if I have another manager or person in charge who can sit in on that, who can document it as we're going through the discipline. Alicia, if you are a new manager over a department and former manager wasn't good with documentation, you have to start at the beginning. Yes, you do. And that's the perfect time for change. If something wasn't being done to the best of that manager's abilities, or maybe that was a weakness of a prior manager, that's a new time to set expectations. If you're a new manager taking over a department, I strongly recommend, folks, here's what I expect of all of you once you have a little team meeting, and this is how I plan to go forward. And then again, yes, you have to start documenting. Like you say, you might have known somebody had poor attendance beforehand, but for whatever reason, the prior manager didn't appreciate conflict and therefore avoided conflict. So again, never addressed the attendance issue. So folks have always, I always say that's the perfect time. When I've got new leaders within our organization, I say now's the time to start fresh, because then you can always say the change in management is the reason that the procedure is now being enforced. Okay? Let's see here. Could you use past time cards? Yes, you could, as long as not too much time has gone by. I don't have a problem with that. We do have things such as in our manual stating falsification of time card is immediate termination, because we do kind of use an honor system in filling out our time cards. You know, you can go back if you need that prior documentation. If someone says they were at work, they weren't at work, or they were late, they weren't late. So you can definitely use that as your proof. You can use any form of proof in going back. But I wouldn't say I would go back a year. You know, 6 to 3 months might be a good time frame, just as long as it doesn't seem like you're digging things up, because you don't want that employee to feel as though you are retaliating against them for something they might be doing now. You know, but if it's clearly documented, again, sometimes I just start with a fresh slate and go forward, because if it is an attendance issue, if they've been an attendance problem, they're probably going to continue to be an attendance issue, is what I have found. So I feel like that's the best way to handle it, is just starting fresh. But I don't necessarily have a problem with you using past time cards if you have that valid documentation, as long as you're not going back too far. So as long as it's more recent, because honestly, unless you're willing to look at everyone's time card and go back that far, would you be disciplining everyone? So that's something to think about. Okay, just giving Tina a minute here. Okay, it looks like I might be getting bombarded, so I'll do my best to keep up with everyone's questions. As you can see, while they finish typing, real quick, the bottom portion of my screen, supervisors, managers should ensure that they've applied the 5 principles of effective discipline. Again, corrective, fair, consistent, progressive, and due process before disciplining employees. Always use the 5 W's of documentations, the who, what, when, where, why, and sometimes the how, and the 5 principles of discipline to document performance or conduct any problems there. Again, my last statement, documentation should clarify the nature of the infraction, its negative impact, and proposed management and employee action. For those of you who might be interested, after the end of the presentation, email me. I have a nice little form that you can very easily tailor. It gives you some suggestions. I think it's very helpful in a coaching. It keeps it very neat, clear, and has suggestions for you. I just didn't think I had time to fit it into the slideshow, so I'm happy to share that form as well for more of a progressive discipline policy. I think you guys will find it very simple to use. Diana Kane, what about the at-will in Kentucky? At-will in Kentucky is exactly that. You have the right to terminate at any time, regardless of all the other situations, and basically you do have the right. If you just like someone's hair color, you have the right to terminate. But if you're going to terminate for an at-will reason, you better make sure that your bases are covered, your documentation's there. And again, are you applying it consistently across the board with all employees? Just like the goofy example I just said, hair color. I once worked with an attorney on an at-will situation, and again, that's what she told me. If someone dislikes your hair color according to at-will, yes, they can let you go. In this day and age of folks who are changing their hair color, not that it's a real problem, but you know, that ultimately could be a reason. Just make sure you're doing it consistently with all employees across the board. Tina, okay, since we're talking about being consistent, I have an employee who asks to be off every Friday and work every Saturday due to child care issues. In an effort to treat everyone the same, how do I do this? How do I do this in this situation? Well, Tina, for that one, what I suggest is you have to decide, one, if it works for your organization. Because could you accommodate everyone's request who had such a request? Maybe, maybe not, depending on the size of your staff. But what I found when we've done things like that where we've accommodated someone, maybe they're working another job, maybe I don't know what they're doing, and yet they want to work every Friday, Saturday. Well, inevitably, it comes along, somebody wants Friday, Saturday, or Sunday off. So as long as the group understands that, oh, Susie will work every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but there may be an occasional time you have to cover. This is giving you a break as well as her, accommodating her. But again, are you going to be able to accommodate the next person's request for every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? So you may be getting yourself into more of a conundrum than anything by allowing one situation. Again, that's probably going to depend on the size of your organization. So like I said, different things have worked here, but then I always hear grumbling. If you were to have that person who requested a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, well then that might be okay for a special or a serious health condition or something of that nature. My employees have been understanding. But in certain departments, if someone's made an exception, before long the department becomes disgruntled because, oh, well, she favorites her, oh, she lets her get everything she wants, or, you know, they let this person do it, but how come I can't work every Monday, Wednesday, Friday? So please make sure that, you know, you be cautious in that going forward, just because you could be setting a precedent going forward. So, you know, I'm always happy to work with people when I can. If it's on a case-by-case basis, yes, but if you decide that case, make sure that you're applying that consistently going forward. Brenda, can an employee ask to see their personnel file? Yes, they can, because what I like to say is that I never have any secrets in their personnel file. I keep a set of 4 or 5 file folders. What I put in each one, my first one consists of just their application, their resume, you know, everything that they initially started with. And that's the only one I show supervisors. And I will only show a supervisor in the presence of myself. I will share that with a supervisor because there is no reason for her to go through, a supervisor to go through like my second folder contains all of their required paperwork, their W-4, their, you know, other information. My third folder is all benefits information, so there is no reason that any other supervisor would need that third folder. My fourth folder has to do with training, and my fifth folder is a medical folder, which is kept completely separate from the rest of their personnel file, because medical information should never be shared. So if an employee, I have had an employee ask her to, I've even had an employee ask about copying their personnel file. As long as you put nothing in there that's worth hiding, again, don't put those offhanded comments in there or something that someone's documented. I'm not trying to say cover anything up, but maybe you keep comment folders somewhere else that are kept confidential and kept locked. But I would not create something in the personnel file that you would not want to be seen by an employee. Because again, as libraries, sometimes we can be held by the open records laws. And at some point, those personnel files could become part of open records. From what I understand, because I did get into one case several years ago. And so I learned from that nothing I ever wanted to be afraid of would ever be in a personnel file. The 2 folks who had come to me at some point in time in their careers and asked to see their personnel file were shocked. I don't know what they thought would be in there, but there was nothing in there but the required paperwork, their enrollment forms, their benefit enrollment forms, their required forms, their you know, general emergency contact information, their training information. So nothing. Their past performance reviews are in there, but again, if you're taking a look at the performance reviews before filing so that they have no, you know, subjective comments, then that's not a bad thing. Obviously, if it's a performance review, it's something they've already seen, so as long as the comment is not too subjective there, it shouldn't be a problem. So just being cautious. But again, it's what you put in your personnel file that can make a difference. And Brenda, if you'd like later on after the presentation and you want to email me, I can send you an outline of what I have for those files and how I create my files as to what goes into each folder. So that may be helpful. Okay, looks like I'm winding down to a few minutes. I'm going to jump into the next couple of slides. And okay, a little bit to touch base here on the exempt versus non-exempt. I have pulled up from the Department of Labor, the Wage and Hour Division here. These are the current exemptions for the current categories as they stand today. I know with the proposed changes and with that wage rate going to $50,440, if you don't meet all of the tests on an exemption test, every category, then you do not qualify to be exempt. So going forward, be aware, probably many of you will have to have your employees now become non-exempt. Now, that's not necessarily a demotion. Some people will see it as that. Some people, it's a status. But again, some of our libraries, I know, incorporate comp time for those who work more than 40. But again, you're going to have to be very cautious of that. So you may see it necessary, depending on the size of your organization, how you're going to budget for overtime. Because the best way, and one of the ways you can never get in trouble, is to pay someone as an hourly employee as long as you're paying them time and a half for anything over 40 hours. So that is your safest way, is to classify them as non-exempt, but I know with the libraries and the salary structures that a lot of libraries are, it's going to be very, I think, preventative if a lot of them just go non-exempt. Because again, when I say all test of these, if you just, for example, look at that executive exemption, and again, I know this is small, but if you pull up this fact sheet 17A off of the Wage and Hour Division's website, they would have to meet each of those bullet points to qualify for the executive exemption. It used to be in the past you didn't have to qualify for every one, but you had to have the majority. Now going forward, I understand you will have to have all of them. So that salary being the biggest one of them that's going to impact our library organizations. You see the administrative exemption, the top of the second page. I think they now recall to it as the professional exemption or the learned professional employee exemption. I know several library systems used to have a lot of their librarians classified as the professional exemption under the learned professional employee exemption because they were in creative positions or they possessed a degree in science, therefore covering the folks with masters in library and information science. But again, if they don't meet that salary, new salary guideline, if it goes into effect later this year, I think we're looking more at third quarter than July 1st, so September 1 possibly, but just watching the news. So you may start preparing your people so that it's not such of a hard impact when they realize or think they've been demoted, because it's not a demotion. It's unfortunately I want to say this, I guess, the environment that we're in nonprofit libraries to be within these guidelines. And, I don't think a lot of us have the capabilities of all of a sudden bumping someone's salary up $10,000. So you probably have a lot of people in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. And I don't know that many of you can all afford to give everyone a $10,000 increase. So just being cautious of that. So you may want to start preparing your staff as you look at all of your staff who might be full-time and where they fall within this category of being exempt or non-exempt. So that's something to be very cautious of and be looking for, because this will be a change for a lot of the library systems if the current proposed regulation goes through with a salary, an annual salary limit of $50,440. So again, being cautious of that. So that's really, I think, all that I have for you today. We have a few minutes left, and I'm happy to take on any other questions. But I know, like I said, I just recently did a presentation down, I believe it was at KPLA in Bowling Green, and that ended up taking quite a bit of the end of our time. Once we got on that subject, I had many questions regarding that exempt versus non-exempt. So you're never going to hurt yourself by classifying someone as non-exempt, but you will have to pay overtime if they work anything more than 40 hours in whatever you define as a work week. Okay? So I'll open it up to taking questions and see if there's anything else I can help any of you with. I'm happy to. Again, feel free to email me, call me later with your individual questions. I'm happy to address that if you want to address it more privately. I'm always here for any of you in your smaller systems. I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. And thank you, and I hope you all benefited in some way and hopefully learned something new today. And so yes, Deborah, changing an exempt to a non-exempt would be legal. So if they're not meeting the definition of an exempt level employee, it is not illegal to change them to non-exempt.
Sherry, this is Charlie. I'm just going to hop on real quick and change
Sure.
the screen over so everybody can download the slides if they'd like to, and click on over to the next slide. It's got the instructions and still got Sherry's contact information on there too in case you need that. If anybody has any specific questions for Sherry, I'd go ahead and take advantage of her vast knowledge while we've got her here. Go ahead and chat those in. And while we've still got everybody, I hate to do this because this is sort of off the subject, but there is a attendee named Julie that we need the last name for. I just noticed that. So Julie, if you could please chat your name in so I make sure you get credit. I would appreciate that. Well, Sherry, the document that you had earlier that had the information about breaks and lunches and things like that, you said that you could make that available to people if they were interested?
Sure. If they just want to email me, that way I know them specifically are interested, and then that way I can email them an electronic copy.
Perfect.
That's just that's straight out of our BCPL employee manual. I just kind of wanted to give an example of how we document the hours worked. Again, I learned down at KPLA that some of the folks have different guidelines because they're run by their counties. So hopefully the counties are all staying compliant, and hopefully some of our smaller systems may not have to worry about all of the laws and let the county take care of it for them.
Okay, well, it looks like maybe Diana's typing a question. I think that's it. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our attendees today? It looks like the questions have slowed down. So
I can't think of anything. I would just, highly recommend everyone to watch those changes as they come about for the exempt versus non-exempt status. If they do not change that salary, I'm told it's in its final segment of the law. The discussion is closed, so it's looking like it's pretty much going to go forward. I know there was a lot of discussion how that affect non-exempt and how that exemption affected nonprofits because, again, a lot of us are not at that salary cap, and that was such an extreme increase. I think it was a 40-something% increase from the previous amount of salary, which was $23,000, I believe. So being cautious on that, and just keeping an eye on that because that may significantly impact our libraries and how folks classify their employees. And let's see, Diana here. Do you pay part-time on holidays, or do you change their hours prior to a holiday? Yes, we did create something. Unfortunately, it's one of the few benefits our part-time employees receive, but we have, if they're the way our manual stated, if they're an 18 to 29-hour employee, we will pay them for 4 hours for the holiday as a part-time employee. If it's their regularly scheduled day to work and maybe they're an employee who work every Saturday and work 8 hours, we would pay them 8 hours to keep them whole. So what little benefit we can provide to our part-time employees is about keeping them whole so that they don't ever take a loss because of a holiday.
Okay, well, I'd say we're good.
Okay.
Sherry, really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And
okay, no problem.
And I encourage you all to contact Sherry if you have any questions once the webinar is over. Thank you all for attending today, and when you're ready to exit, you can just click the X in the top right-hand corner of the screen. And again, thank you so much, Sherry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, and have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.